If you're relying on willpower alone, you're not setting yourself up for success. Hi, my name is Daniel. For years, people have been commenting on the strength of my willpower. Over just the last few years, I went from having a fairly sedentary lifestyle to walking 3 to 5 miles a day, weight training 3 days a week, and from basically never flossing to flossing every day. But I didn't depend on willpower. By the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of willpower and why it often feels insufficient, as well as a suite of tools available to use to help you break undesired behaviors and pursue desired behaviors. First of all, how do we define willpower? For the purposes of this video, we're going to define willpower as the ability to pursue desired behaviors and to resist undesired behaviors. You might be familiar with the marshmallow test. It was an experiment performed in the 1960s at Stanford University. In this experiment, children ages 4 to 5, preschool age, were brought into a room one at a time and presented with a single marshmallow. The researcher told the child, "You're welcome to eat this marshmallow if you want it, or you can wait 10 minutes and when I come back, if the marshmallow is still here, you can have a second marshmallow." The researcher then left the room and observed the children on the cameras. Naturally, of course, some of the children couldn't resist the temptation and ate the marshmallow. However, some of the other kids were able to resist and were rewarded with a second marshmallow 10 minutes later. The researchers followed these children throughout their lives, well into adulthood. Interestingly, they found that those children who exhibited self-control as a child also tended to exhibit self-control as an adult. They generally scored higher on their SAT scores, were less prone to substance abuse, and were less prone to be obese. The researchers developed a framework to explain the impulse-control dichotomy. They called it the hot and cool system. The hot emotional response and the cool cognitive response. For the purposes of our analogy, we're going to view this as a water tank that holds the waters of reason. And those waters of reason are used to quench the flames of desire. What the researchers didn't really consider was not everyone responds to the same stimulus in the same way. For example, perhaps some of the kids liked marshmallows more than others, or perhaps some of the kids were hungrier than others. This makes a lot of sense, right? If I presented a bowl full of oatmeal raisin cookies to a room full of people, some people will be drawn to those cookies immediately. Others will view the oatmeal raisin and hardly have any interest at all. Same stimulus, different response. Some people just also naturally have a higher cognitive capacity. They have more water available in the tank, if you will. In the 1990s, Roy Baumeister held another experiment. With the first group of people, he brought them to a room and presented them with a bowl of radishes and a bowl of cookies. He encouraged them to sample from either bowl as they wished, and afterwards presented them with an impossible puzzle. He timed them to see how long it would take before they gave up as a group. He then repeated the experiment with a second group of people. However, he told them that they were not permitted to eat any of the cookies from the cookie bowl. He then presented them with the same impossible puzzle and timed how long it took them before they quit. He repeated this experiment with several groups. On average, the groups that had to exhibit self-control and resist eating those cookies tended to give up in less than half the time as those who did not have to display the same restraints. This led Baumeister and the other researchers on the project to conclude that willpower is a limited resource, and that by draining the resource earlier in the day, there would be less left later in the day. Perhaps this is why, after a particularly grueling day of work, all you want to do is crash on the couch, order in some junk food, and binge your favorite series, rather than getting up and doing work around the house or being otherwise productive. Or maybe why you're so strong on your diet from Monday through Thursday, but then come Friday you find yourself knee-deep in ice cream and pizza. You've just run out. There's nothing left in the tank. You're running on empty. And when the flames of desire present themselves and there's not enough water of reason left in the tank to quench those flames, the emotional response wins. The good news is, modern research seems to suggest that we can partially refill our tank through good mood, good attitude, and the beliefs that we hold. You've probably heard it said, whether you believe you can do something or you don't, you're right. This might actually be true, at least for willpower. You can also partially refill the tank by getting good sleep and by eating good food that gives the brain the glucose it needs as its primary fuel source. Other research seems to suggest that it's possible to train one's willpower, or expand the size of one's tank. It's actually not all that difficult to do either. All you have to do is practice doing things that you don't really want to do. So let's say you don't particularly feel like doing dishes right now. Well, this is a great opportunity to practice willpower. Go do those dishes. Make your tank bigger. After all, the bigger your tank is, the more water you have available to quench flames throughout the day, and the more likely you are to have water left in your tank at the end of the day. Regardless, no matter how big your tank is, and no matter how much you partially refill the tank, if the outflow of water from your tank is greater than the inflow, you're going to end the day on empty, and that is not setting yourself up for success. And so that brings us to the principles and strategies required to control the outflow. To demonstrate some of these principles, let's start with a couple of stories. The first story is the tale of Ulysses and the Sirens. Ulysses was returning home by ship after a long war. He had been given notification that in order to get home, he would have to pass through the territory of the Sirens, mythical creatures whose song was so enticing, men would drive their ships into the sea rocks just to get closer to them. Ulysses wanted to hear the songs of the Sirens, but didn't want to put his own life or the life of his men in danger, so he devised a plan. He instructed his crew to tie him to the mast of the ship, and that no matter how much he cried out or begged for them to release him, that they would not do so. He then instructed them to plug their own ears with wax, so that they themselves would not be able to hear the sound of the siren song. And so, that's exactly what they did. The sailors plugged their ears, tied their captain to the mast of the ship, and continued to row through the territory of the Sirens. Once they were in range, Ulysses heard the songs of the Sirens, and begged to be released so that he could go be with them. But his crew, deaf to his cries and deaf to the song of the Sirens, rowed on, and so they made it through the territory of the Sirens safely. So this next story is not nearly as epic or dramatic. It actually comes from a user on Reddit. In this story, they explain how they implement some of these principles and strategies to overcome the snooze button. The Redditor describes that they place an old-fashioned alarm clock in their bathroom. In the morning, when the alarm clock goes off, he has to get out of bed, go to the bathroom, shut off the alarm clock, and then forces himself to sit on the toilet for a few minutes. After he gets up off the toilet, he washes his hands, brushes his teeth, shaves, and washes his face, and by that point, he's well awake. He reports a 100% success rate ever since putting these steps in place into getting up on time when his alarm goes off. Alright, the first principle we need to understand is identifying and understanding our triggers. An emotional response doesn't come out of nowhere. It almost always needs a trigger, some sort of stimulus, whether that's the marshmallow on the table in front of you, the sound of the siren song, or the alarm clock buzzing in the bathroom. It can also be any object, any sound, any smell, any visual, a memory, perhaps a person, a place, a time of day, anything that triggers an emotional response. Identifying and understanding these triggers and the emotional response they elicit is the first step in understanding how to tackle them effectively. The next principle is the principle of environmental design. This is the process of intentionally altering the world around you to hide those triggers that elicit undesired responses, and to highlight the triggers that elicit desired responses. In the story of Ulysses, the sailors are implementing the principle of environmental design by plugging their ears, and in doing so, preventing themselves from hearing the siren song. No trigger, no temptation. The Redditor demonstrates environmental design by moving the alarm clock into the bathroom. By doing so, he forces himself to stand up in the morning, walk to another room, and physically take action. For an average person, environmental design could be as simple as clearing all the junk food out of the house, or clearing the booze out of the house, or keeping a water bottle within arm's reach at all times. All of these are a way of strategically moving triggers in one's environment to either become invisible or more visible, and thus provoking the desired response. However, it may not always be possible or practical to remove triggers from one's environment or to add them in, and in these cases, we look to our next couple of principles. Next, we have the principle of an implementation intention. With this principle, a person is stating how they plan to respond to a particular trigger. For the Redditor, their implementation intention may sound something like this. When my alarm goes off in the morning, I will get up, shut off the alarm, and sit on the toilet for 5 minutes. That's it. Simple. He's telling himself how he's going to respond to a particular trigger. For an average person, this could sound something like, when I go out tonight, if someone offers me a drink, I will order a club soda. Or perhaps, when I feel like smoking, I will immediately write down 3 reasons why I'm no longer a smoker. An implementation intention is also one of the methods I use to start flossing every day. My implementation intention was, after I finish brushing my teeth in the evening, I will immediately floss at least 1 tooth. Now that probably sounds silly, but we'll come back to that in a moment. The next principle to discuss is the principle of pre-commitment. This is very similar to an implementation intention, but it takes it a step further. With pre-commitment, you commit to a course of action before it occurs. So, in the story of Ulysses pre-committed himself by having himself tied to the mast of the ship. Thus, when the trigger came, the Song of the Sirens, he was physically incapable of falling into temptation. With an implementation intention, you're saying, if or when such a trigger occurs, this is how I intend to respond. With pre-commitment, you're saying, I have set myself up physically such that if such a trigger occurs, then I cannot hurt myself or others because of the actions I've previously taken. An average person might be able to implement this in their life if, say, for example, they leave their credit card at home and take only the cash required when they go shopping, thus preventing themselves from overspending or making any impulse buys. Or perhaps the person who calls the restaurant in advance and places their order so that they won't be tempted to change their mind once they get to the restaurant. In either case, whether for implementation intention or for pre-commitment, both of these require that you first identify and understand your triggers so that you can plan for them. And actually, most addicts report that this is the most useful tool that they were able to use to overcome their addiction. The next principle we're going to discuss is the decisive moment. The decisive moment is a moment in time where a simple decision leads to outsized results. For example, in the story of Ulysses, the decisive moments were when the sailors plugged their ears and tied their captain to the mast of the ship. Both of those decisions probably only took seconds or maybe minutes to actually employ. But after doing so, they could have been in siren territory for hours and have left the area unscathed. For the Redditor, the decisive moment is the moment that they walk into the bathroom, shut off their alarm, and decide to sit on the toilet and start their morning routine. For an average person, a decisive moment might be the moment that you clear the house of junk food, or the moment that you drain all the booze down the drain. It might be the moment that you decide to park in the furthest parking spot at work, thus forcing yourself to walk further to get to the office and to walk back to your car after work. The point is, the decisive moment is making a decision now that'll save you lots of time further down the road. And doesn't have to be a small moment either. Perhaps you dedicate a few hours on a Sunday to meal prep, so that throughout the rest of the week, you have easy-to-grab healthy, prepackaged meals ready to go. The next principle is the 2-minute rule. The idea behind this principle is that it's easier to commit to things that take shorter periods of time than things that take longer periods of time. So, in the case of the Redditor, perhaps the idea of waking up on time in the morning without hitting the snooze button and then having to go through the entire day that laid before them was too much to bear. So instead, by implementing the 2-minute rule, the Redditor set themselves up for success. All they had to do was shut off the alarm and sit on the toilet. That's it. For an average person who wants to start walking more, maybe the idea of going outside and going for a 3 to 5 mile hike is just too overwhelming. That person could implement the 2-minute rule to instead maybe make some easier goals. When you get home from work, put on your shoes, step outside, close the door behind you. Simple. Easy. Anyone can do that, even on days when you don't feel like it. And most of the time, you'll probably find once you're out there with your shoes on, you're probably going to feel just fine to actually start walking. And if not, that's okay, because that's not the point. The point right now is to build the habit of putting on your shoes and going outside. After a couple of weeks, that'll become so routine and so automatic, You don't even have to think about it anymore. You do that for a while and continue to expand 2 minutes at a time. Walk 2 blocks, walk 3 blocks. Within a couple of months, you're walking your 3 to 5 miles per day and barely even thinking about it. I mentioned earlier that I had the implementation intention that after I finished brushing my teeth in the evening, I would take out the floss and floss 1 tooth. The truth is, sometimes I really didn't feel like flossing my teeth, but I could commit consistently to flossing at least 1 tooth. And let me tell you, in 99% of the cases, once I have the floss in my hand and once I've done 1 tooth, I'm doing them all. I'm already there. I've already done the hard work of getting started. And in the 1% of the cases where I don't carry through, it doesn't really matter because the habit is building. And this takes us to our final principle, the principle of automation and simplification. The idea here is to make trivial decisions so automatic and so routine that they take no mental capacity at all. Look at people like Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, Mark Zuckerberg, Barack Obama. These men, and many others like them, typically set up routines such that they wake up at the same time every day. They brush their teeth with the same brand of toothpaste. They wear the same outfit. They eat the same breakfast. They follow the same schedule. Why? Because it reduces the amount of trivial decisions they have to make. For the average person, this is building routines and making habits, letting things become automatic, to the point that you don't even have to think about it anymore. So yes, willpower is important, and we've already discussed that you can train willpower and expand the size of your overall tank by doing hard things and practicing willpower. We've discussed how you can partially refill your tank through mood, attitude, beliefs, and good sleep. But if you can't control the outflow, then you're not setting yourself up for success as best as you can be. By implementing the strategies and principles of understanding your triggers, environmental design, pre-planning, whether through implementation intention or pre-commitment, recognizing and taking advantage of the decisive moment, employing the 2-minute rules, and automating your trivial decisions, you can plug the leaks, control the outflow, and effectively increase your willpower reserves for the choices that actually matter. So, give it a try. See what works for you. Leave me a comment below to know if you'd like me to dive into further detail on any of these. Trust me, we've barely scratched the surface. Also let me know in the comments if there's any strategies here that I may have missed. If you like this video and want to hear more content like it, consider subscribing. Otherwise, click on the link on screen to hear more content from my channel. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.